The Pacific Islands revealed the bulldozer's truest power. Coral atolls, volcanic ridges, swamps thick with mangroves, all were turned into fortresses or airfields by engines and blades. On Tarawa, Marines bled for every yard, but bulldozers behind them cleared wreckage, pushed seawalls aside, and carved open strips for supply trucks. At Peleliu, where the coral seemed harder than steel, machines scraped until sparks lit the night. The taste of salt mixed with dust. The sound of blades against rock became the pulse of battle. On Iwo Jima, the costliest marine battle of the war, bulldozers labored even while shells fell. Japanese fire cut down men, yet crews kept engines running, protected only by thin steel plates. They pushed wrecked tanks into cover for advancing infantry, dug gun pits, and widened landing strips that would later serve B-29 bombers. Survivors remembered the ground trembling constantly, the bitter stench of sulfur mixing with gasoline fumes. For every hour of combat, there were hours of construction. The numbers of Iwo Jima are haunting. More than 20,000 Japanese defenders fought to the death. Nearly 7,000 Americans fell. Yet victory was sealed not just by bravery but by bulldozers that kept airfields functioning under fire. Within days of capture, B-29s made emergency landings on strips bulldozed flat amid corpses and smoke. By war's end, more than 2,200 bombers used Iwo's runways as lifelines. Each one meant hundreds of crewmen saved. The blade had equaled the rifle. In Burma, the road war underscored the same truth. Jungle Mountain stood between India and Chinese allies. Japanese troops cut off supply lines, hoping to strangle China into collapse. Bulldozers, sweating through heat and leeches, carved the Ledo Road. They blasted cliffs, filled rivers, bridged valleys. More than 700 miles of road emerged where none had existed. American and Chinese convoys then rumbled through, bringing weapons, food, and hope. The feat was so immense that one engineer wrote, "We moved mountains with diesel engines." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The sensory life of that road was unforgettable. Men waded through knee-deep mud, mosquitoes buzzing, the air thick with humidity. The roar of bulldozers was constant, echoing through valleys. The smell of rot mingled with fuel. Soldiers tasted quinine in their mouths, fighting malaria while pushing machines through jungles. Yet the road was built, and China remained in the war. By Normandy in June 1944, bulldozers became shock weapons of their own. They landed with infantry, blades raised like shields, engines growling as waves lapped at hulls. They shoved obstacles aside while under sniper fire. German mines exploded, but armored bulldozers rolled on. One machine cleared paths through hedgerows, turning natural defenses into nothing. French civilians later wrote that they heard the engines before the tanks. The earth itself seemed conquered. The ethical capsule sharpened again here. Geneva never regulated bulldozers. They killed indirectly by making war possible. Was it more humane to conquer by construction rather than destruction? Or was it simply another face of industrialized war? Historians disagree. Some argue bulldozers shortened battles, saving lives. Others insist they extended conflict by making offensives unstoppable. The statistics of Normandy prove their reach. By D+30, engineers had landed over 17,000 vehicles and 500,000 tons of supplies. Bulldozers carved roads through flooded fields, pushed wrecks into makeshift walls, and built depots in mud. Without them, the invasion would have bogged down. With them, the Allies broke out into France. American veterans later recalled that bulldozers felt immortal. Tanks burned, trucks stalled, but dozers never stopped. Even wrecked machines were stripped for parts, rebuilt, sent back. Soldiers described seeing blades coated in mud and blood, engines roaring through smoke, sparks flying into night sky. The image burned into memory, machines that fought without firing. General Omar Bradley once admitted, "Our engineers with bulldozers may have been more vital than divisions of infantry. They made movement possible." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words echo Eisenhower's. Both commanders understood that steel blades shaped victory as much as rifles and shells. By war's midpoint, the paradox was undeniable. Armies measured battles in guns and tanks, yet bulldozers moved mountains, carved airfields, raised roads, and rebuilt bridges. They transformed terrain itself into weapon. Against that force, even the strongest defenses faltered. The cold open had become a thunderclap, not of artillery, but of engines, blades, and steel against stone. Victory was being bulldozed into existence. The question now was not whether bulldozers mattered, but how deeply they shaped every campaign that followed. In 1939, when Europe slid into war, bulldozers were still seen as civilian tools. They carved highways, leveled farmland, built dams. Military planners spoke of tanks and bombers, not construction equipment. Yet within 2 years, the United States discovered that a machine designed for farms and roads could become a decisive weapon. The paradox lay in scale. America did not just fight wars, it rebuilt landscapes while fighting them. The context was industrial might. By 1940, the U.S. produced 25% of the world's manufactured goods. When Roosevelt's arsenal of democracy shifted into full gear, factories produced everything from rifles to bombers, and also bulldozers by the tens of thousands. Caterpillar, Alice Chalmers, and International Harvester converted lines into wartime production. A D7 bulldozer weighing nearly 20 tons with a blade over 10 feet wide became as essential as a Sherman tank. Its engine generated over 80 horsepower, slow by tank standards but relentless. The numbers multiplied. By 1945, more than 100,000 bulldozers and tractors served in Allied operations. German planners underestimated this force. Blitzkrieg depended on speed, using roads and rails. But when those were destroyed, Axis supply slowed. American bulldozers erased that advantage. They built new routes, cut through forests, and restored rail beds in days. In Africa, they created desert highways. In Italy, they carved paths through mountains. In the Pacific, they hacked through jungles. Terrain, once Germany and Japan's ally, became neutralized by engines. The sensory contrast stood out. Soldiers remembered the silence after bridges were blown, then the sudden roar of bulldozers arriving. Diesel smoke filled valleys, sparks lit night skies, and soon vehicles rolled again. One engineer wrote, "The enemy destroyed in hours what we replaced in days. They ran out of explosives before we ran out of machines." U.S. National Archives, 1944. The Philippines highlighted this truth. Japanese defenders expected terrain to stall invaders, but bulldozers pushed swamps into roads, widened airfields, and dragged wrecks aside. In days, air power returned, and supplies flowed. Numbers confirm the pace. Between October 1944 and March 1945, engineers built over 70 new airstrips across Pacific Islands. Bulldozers turned mud and coral into lifelines. Civilians noticed too. In France, villagers watched bulldozers clear rubble from towns. For them, these machines symbolized liberation as much as soldiers. A farmer recalled, "We heard engines, not guns, and we knew freedom was coming." Red Cross Report, 1945. Bulldozers did not kill, yet they announced victory. By 1943, military doctrine caught up. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers formalized bulldozer units, assigning them to divisions. A single armored dozer could clear obstacles that would have cost hundreds of infantry lives. In training manuals, bulldozers were described as combat multipliers. Not glamorous, but decisive. The paradox deepened. America's true strength lay not only in how many guns it fired, but in how quickly it built. A bomb crater that halted a convoy in Germany might last days. In American zones, bulldozers filled it by nightfall. One German officer captured in Normandy admitted, "We destroyed, but they rebuilt faster. It broke our spirit." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The sensory details of this speed mattered. Men described Earth trembling as machines moved, the smell of hot oil coating skin, sparks flying as steel scraped stone. Troops marched behind them, tasting dust but grateful for passage. Without bulldozers, exhaustion set in. With them, momentum never stopped. Italy's mountains proved the hardest test. German demolitions blocked every valley. Bulldozers climbed inclines at crawling pace, chains clanking, blades sparking against rock. Engineers recalled nights where they worked by moonlight, hands numb from cold, fumes thick in throats. Yet each morning, columns of armor moved forward. Without those paths, Allied offensives would have frozen. The ethical reflection returned. War had always glorified destruction. But what about construction as weapon? Geneva did not speak to bulldozers, yet their impact was lethal indirectly. They allowed offensives that killed thousands. Were they humanitarian by shortening wars, or cruel by extending battles? Historians remain divided. By D-Day, context was clear. The invasion would fail without engineers and machines. Bulldozers rode landing craft beside tanks. When beaches clogged with wrecks, they shoved debris aside. When mines blocked roads, they buried them. In days, supply depots sprawled inland. Normandy was not just a soldier's battle. It was an engineer's triumph. Eisenhower himself noted, "Without the bulldozer, our invasions would have bogged down." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words sealed their place in history. Context revealed the truth. America did not just fight. It built victory from the ground up. In North Africa, the Axis first saw what bulldozers could do under fire. When Rommel's Africa Corps struck deep into Allied lines, they expected terrain to favor them. Narrow passes, soft sand, broken roads. These had slowed armies for centuries. Yet, wherever German armor advanced, American engineers followed with bulldozers. Machines crawled under shellfire, their blades lowering to carve new tracks, their engines echoing like drums of industry. Within days, supply convoys rolled where no road had existed before. Rommel's staff officers later admitted their surprise. Reports, captured by British intelligence, noted, "The enemy repairs faster than we destroy. Their machines work day and night. Our demolitions are rendered useless." U.S. National Archives, 1943. The complaint revealed the paradox. German tactics assumed destruction would stall the enemy. Bulldozers turned destruction into delay. On the beaches of Sicily, bulldozers again stunned defenders. Within hours of landings, they shoved wreckage aside, flattened dunes, and built roads inland. German observers expected beaches to remain impassable for days. Instead, by nightfall, trucks unloaded artillery miles inland. The shock was palpable. Soldiers who thought they had time to regroup suddenly faced full divisions arriving over improvised highways. The sensory experience for defenders was bewildering. They heard engines instead of silence, saw dust rising where craters had been, smelled oil and fresh-turned earth instead of decay. Civilians, too, watched in disbelief. A Sicilian farmer said years later, "We saw Americans move earth as if it were water. It was like watching mountains bend." Red Cross Report, 1945. German demolitions teams grew desperate. Bridges were blown again and again, roads cratered with dynamite. Yet bulldozers filled holes with rubble, shoved collapsed beams aside, and pulled prefabricated bridges into place. Engineers recalled the choking dust, the clang of chains, the sting of sweat in eyes, but also the satisfaction of watching convoys roll by within hours. One officer remarked, "We made engineers our first targets. If we killed them, maybe the army would halt, but they always kept coming." The Pacific offered its own shock. Japanese defenders entrenched in jungles believed thick vegetation would stall invaders. Instead, bulldozers tore paths through mangroves, scraped coral into runways, and leveled volcanic rock. On Saipan, machines cleared fields under sniper fire. On Leyte, they dragged wrecked planes aside to open supply lanes. The sight of these machines unnerved defenders. A captured Japanese officer admitted, "We expected men with rifles. We did not expect machines that remade the island itself." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The ethical reflection sharpened in these moments. Was the bulldozer a combatant? It did not fire, but its work killed indirectly. Roads built under fire allowed artillery to advance, planes to land, tanks to strike. The line between tool and weapon blurred. Geneva Conventions had no clause for bulldozers, yet their effect was as decisive as guns. At Anzio, the paradox turned deadly. German artillery pounded beaches, hoping to choke supply. Bulldozers rolled anyway, blades down, pushing wrecks into breakwaters, carving channels through mud. Survivors recalled deafening crashes as shells exploded nearby, sparks flying from steel, fumes stinging their lungs. Still, convoys landed. Still, supplies flowed. Numbers tell the story. At Anzio alone, engineers built more than 90 miles of roads in the first 2 weeks. Bulldozers cleared over 200 wrecks from beaches. Without that labor, the beachhead might have collapsed. Instead, the Allies endured, reinforcing until the breakout came. German reports grew darker. One analyst wrote, "The enemy is not halted by terrain or destruction. He builds his own terrain." Captured document, 1944. It was a stunning admission. Armies had always been limited by geography. Bulldozers erased that limit. The sensory contrasts deepened. Where defenders expected silence after demolitions, they heard engines. Where they saw obstacles, they soon saw dust clouds of new roads. Where they smelled cordite, they smelled oil and earth. The psychological shock was immense. It was not only that the enemy fought, it was that he rebuilt faster than destruction could matter. By Normandy, shock became despair. German troops watched bulldozers clear hedgerows, bury mines, and carve depots in hours. The Atlantic Wall was meant to stall invaders for weeks. Instead, by the first week, bulldozers had cut supply roads deep inland. Prisoners told interrogators, "We did not understand how they advanced so quickly. We destroyed, but every morning there was a new road." U.S. National Archives, 1944. The ethical capsule appears again. Can construction be classified as a weapon? In effect, yes. Bulldozers multiplied every other weapon's power. Tanks moved, artillery fired, aircraft landed, all because engineers changed the ground itself. It raised questions. Is victory built more on destruction or creation? Historians still debate. The numbers leave little doubt. In 1944 alone, American engineers built over 1,200 new airfields worldwide. Each one bulldozed from jungle, desert, or ruin. Each one multiplied air power, shortened battles, and hastened defeat of Axis powers. Against that scale, even the most fanatical defenses faltered. Shock gave way to resignation. German and Japanese reports alike confessed the same conclusion. America could not be stopped by destroying. America would always rebuild, and at the heart of that resilience was the bulldozer. By 1944, the bulldozer was no longer an auxiliary tool. It had become a frontline weapon of logistics. Everywhere the U.S. Army and Navy advanced, bulldozers followed. The scale was staggering. The Corps of Engineers employed more than 600,000 men worldwide, supported by fleets of machines. Reports showed that by mid-1944, American factories delivered more than 1,000 bulldozers per month. They arrived crated on ships, assembled on beaches, and sent straight to work. In the Pacific, the tempo accelerated. After the capture of the Marianas, bulldozers transformed coral atolls into bases for B-29 bombers. At Tinian, engineers bulldozed the largest airfield of the war, with runways more than 8,000 feet long. They cleared 4,500 acres of jungle and rock in just 2 months. Over 8,000 construction troops worked alongside 300 bulldozers and countless other machines. The result? Strips from which bombers launched raids that burned Tokyo. The paradox was sharp. Bombers destroyed cities, but bulldozers built the platforms for that destruction. The sensory scale of Tinian was overwhelming. Engines roared day and night, drowning even surf. Sparks from blades lit night skies, turning coral dust into clouds that coated men's lungs. Soldiers recalled the acrid taste of limestone powder, the grit crunching between teeth. The smell of diesel clung to uniforms. And always, the low vibration in the ground as hundreds of machines moved mountains in real time. Numbers underscore the feat. Tinian's North Field became the largest airbase in the world, capable of hosting 265 bombers at once. Bulldozers had carved that into existence. In the European theater, scale looked different but equally decisive. During Operation Cobra, bulldozers cut corridors through bocage hedgerows, allowing armor to surge forward. They also widened roads for truck convoys. By late 1944, the Red Ball Express carried over 12,000 tons of supplies daily into France. Roads existed because bulldozers forced them open. German commanders felt the pressure. One captured colonel admitted, "We thought supply lines would choke them. Instead, their machines built more roads in a month than we had in years." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The statement reflected despair. Strategy built on obstruction collapsed before construction. The ethical capsule sharpened here. Bulldozers blurred categories. They were not weapons by design, yet they became lethal by consequence. If a dozer opened a runway that launched bombers, was its work an act of war? Some argued yes, others no. Historians today note that bulldozers embody the industrialization of violence. They did not kill directly, but they multiplied killing power. In France, civilians witnessed another paradox. Bulldozers that cleared wreckage also rebuilt lives. Villagers remembered machines scraping rubble from roads, reopening paths to markets, leveling ground for shelters. One French child later said, "We saw monsters of steel, but they gave us back our town." Red Cross Report, 1945. Liberation smelled not of roses but of diesel. The sensory contrasts grew. Soldiers described marching through clouds of dust raised by bulldozers, ears ringing from constant engines, eyes stung by sparks of welding torches at night. In Italy, the sound of machines echoed through valleys louder than artillery. One veteran said, "We slept with engines roaring. It was our lullaby." U.S. National Archives, 1944. Numbers never stopped climbing. By the end of 1944, Allied engineers had constructed more than 400 major bridges across Europe, cleared thousands of miles of roads, and built more than 1,200 airstrips globally. Bulldozers were the workhorses behind each statistic. Each airstrip meant hundreds of bombing missions. Each road meant divisions supplied. Each bridge meant tanks across rivers. The Pacific continued to test limits. At Okinawa, bulldozers crawled across terrain pitted by artillery. Under kamikaze raids, they carved supply depots into hillsides, flattened fields for artillery, and cleared wreckage of destroyed ships on beaches. Survivors described the smell of fuel fires mixing with sea salt, the constant rumble of engines, the taste of ash in air. It was war through labor, relentless and exhausting. Japanese defenders were stunned at speed. Reports intercepted later revealed disbelief. "We bombarded their roads. By next day, the roads were open. We cratered their fields. By next morning, planes landed." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The sense of futility deepened. Sacrifice could not outpace bulldozers. The ethical dilemma pressed harder. Was it more humane to fight with machines that rebuilt instead of destroyed? Or was it more cruel because it ensured war lasted until total collapse? Historians remain divided. Some argue bulldozers saved lives by shortening campaigns. Others suggest they prolonged suffering by making advances unstoppable. The debate lingers like the smoke of engines. By late 1944 and early 1945, bulldozers became symbols of inevitability. They were seen pushing through rubble in Aachen, scraping volcanic ash at Iwo Jima, or carving docks in Manila. Soldiers photographed them like trophies. Journalists described them as giants of steel that carried victory on their blades. The machine had become myth, and still the paradox pulsed. Bulldozers did not fire shells, yet their roar echoed louder in memory. They did not storm bunkers, yet their blades breached walls. They did not bleed, yet they bore scars of battle in bent steel and scorched paint. By the time Germany fell and Japan faced invasion, the world understood. Victory had been built as much as it had been fought. By 1945, the bulldozer was no longer a support vehicle. It had become a strategic asset. American production lines had turned out so many machines that bulldozers rolled across every theater of war. The numbers were immense. Caterpillar alone produced more than 50,000 tractors and bulldozers during the conflict. International Harvester and Alice Chalmers added tens of thousands more. Together, they supplied enough machines to outfit entire armies of engineers. Factories in Illinois and Wisconsin produced machines around the clock. Workers described sparks lighting assembly halls like fireworks, the clang of steel echoing into night. The smell of hot oil and molten metal filled lungs. One riveter remembered, "Every bolt we drove meant another road in France, another runway in the Pacific." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The connection between factory floor and battlefield had never been clearer. On the front lines, the impact was visible in every operation. During the crossing of the Rhine, bulldozers dragged pontoon sections, leveled riverbanks, and built approaches for tanks. Within 48 hours, entire armored divisions crossed. German commanders who had counted on rivers as barriers realized those barriers no longer mattered. The ground itself had become malleable under American blades. The sensory landscape of these crossings was unforgettable. Engines roared across river valleys, smoke from fuel mixed with damp mist. Sparks flashed as chains snapped taut. Soldiers remembered the vibration of earth beneath boots as bulldozers pushed rocks into place. The taste of river water mixed with oil as men hauled pontoons beside machines. War felt less like destruction and more like construction at colossal scale. In the Pacific, the escalation continued. Bulldozers turned Guam, Saipan, and Okinawa into massive bases. On Guam alone, engineers built 5 major airfields, each capable of handling bombers. More than 200 bulldozers scraped coral, leveled hills, and filled valleys. Japanese defenders who hoped terrain would stall Americans instead watched entire landscapes remade. One Japanese diary confessed, "We believed nature would fight for us. Instead, they conquered nature itself." Red Cross Report, 1945. The ethical capsule sharpened once again. If bulldozers could erase geography, did defense even exist? Geneva Conventions had nothing to say about landscapes turned into weapons. Some historians argue this shift marked the beginning of total war's industrial climax, when environment itself became a battlefield, reshaped by machines. Numbers underscored inevitability. Between 1941 and 1945, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers used more than 11 million cubic yards of concrete, 270 million board feet of lumber, and millions of tons of steel. Bulldozers made that possible. They were the first to touch raw ground, the last to leave after runways hardened. One statistic told the whole story. During the war, Allied engineers built more than 400,000 miles of roads worldwide. Bulldozers carried the burden of every mile. Civilians in liberated territories saw escalation in daily life. In the Philippines, bulldozers cleared markets, rebuilt schools, and leveled ground for hospitals, even while fighting raged. For locals, the machines meant hope. A farmer in Luzon recalled, "We heard their engines, and we knew the war was turning." U.S. National Archives, 1945. To civilians, bulldozers were not just tools of war, but symbols of recovery. American soldiers also noticed. Many wrote home describing the machines with awe. Letters spoke of iron beasts that move mountains, and the sound of victory in diesel. Engineers described the tactile details: hands blistered from levers, faces coated in grime, the constant buzz of engines in ears even during sleep. They lived in rhythm with machines. At Okinawa, escalation became brutal. Kamikaze raids struck relentlessly, but bulldozers kept supply lines open. Engineers cleared wreckage of ships, leveled ground for artillery, and carved shelters into hillsides. Survivors recalled the acrid stench of burning oil, the deafening roar of engines, the taste of ash coating throats. Still, convoys moved. Still, supplies flowed. Sacrifice could not break steel blades. German officers after surrender admitted their astonishment. One general told interrogators, "We measured victory in divisions. They measured it in machines. We had courage. They had production, and production won." U.S. National Archives, 1946. His words became a summary of bulldozers' role. Not glorious, but decisive. The paradox deepened with every operation. Tanks and planes destroyed, but bulldozers created. Yet, creation itself killed indirectly by enabling advances that overwhelmed defenses. The blurred line left a lasting question. Was victory built more by destruction or construction? History leans toward both, but bulldozers proved construction could be as lethal as any bomb. By 1945, soldiers joked that bulldozers were immortal. Tanks could be destroyed, but dozers always returned. Crews patched holes with scrap, welded plates over scars, cannibalized parts from wrecks. Machines groaned, smoked, and shook, yet they kept working. One veteran said, "A bulldozer never quits. Only its driver does." Red Cross Report, 1945. The phrase captured their spirit. The escalation closed the gap between battlefield and factory. American industry sent endless machines, and engineers turned them into relentless progress. Against that tide, Axis defenses broke. Bulldozers did not fire shells, but they erased obstacles. By 1945, every campaign bore their mark. Victory was bulldozed into existence. By early 1945, the sound of bulldozers had become the soundtrack of American advance. On every front, the same rhythm played: the thunder of diesel, the scrape of steel, the vibration of earth reshaped. Soldiers recognized it instantly. If you heard a dozer, one infantryman wrote, it meant supplies were coming and the road would hold. U.S. National Archives, 1945. To armies marching thousands of miles, that sound became as reassuring as the crack of rifle fire. The numbers by then were staggering. At the height of the war, Allied engineers were moving more than 10 million cubic yards of earth per month. Entire valleys were cut, rivers redirected, hills reduced. Bulldozers formed the spearhead of this transformation. Caterpillar D7s with engines producing over 80 horsepower ran almost non-stop. Modified versions, armored against machine gun fire, crawled into combat zones to clear mines or shove wreckage aside. Reports from the Pacific mention machines logging 22 hours of operation in a single day. Their engines cooled with water pumped straight from rivers. Factories back home kept pace. The Willow Run plant, famous for bombers, inspired similar assembly for bulldozers. Railcars full of parts rolled into plants. Finished machines rolled out within days. Workers described endless clangs, sparks leaping across darkened halls, the pungent smell of grease embedded in clothing. Women joined production lines, welding frames, and assembling engines, their work as vital as soldiers in trenches. One welder said, "We were not building tractors, we were building victory." U.S. National Archives, 1944. In Europe, escalation became visible in sheer speed. After crossing the Rhine, bulldozers transformed bombed-out Germany into a highway system for advancing armies. Roads widened, bridges repaired, depots raised. Within weeks, supply lines stretched hundreds of miles without faltering. German defenders, already exhausted, faced an opponent whose logistics seemed inexhaustible. One captured officer remarked bitterly, "We destroyed, they rebuilt. We withdrew, they advanced. We bled, they built." Red Cross Report, 1945. The sensory reality of that escalation was unforgettable. Clouds of dust rose high into skies, choking lungs of soldiers marching behind. Diesel smoke drifted across valleys, mixing with scent of cordite from artillery. At night, sparks from welding torches lit ruins brighter than flares. Engineers tasted grit with every breath, their uniforms stiff with dried sweat and oil. Exhaustion was constant, but so was progress. In the Pacific, escalation reached new extremes. Okinawa became the ultimate test. Japanese resistance was fanatical, kamikaze strikes relentless, weather unforgiving. Yet bulldozers carved bases, docks, and roads under constant threat. They dragged wreckage of burning ships into makeshift breakwaters. They dug trenches wide enough to hold artillery regiments. They leveled fields where B-29 bombers would soon land. Survivors remembered the vibration of earth as hundreds of machines ran day and night, the acrid taste of smoke, the salt sting of sweat dripping into wounds. Numbers from Okinawa were immense. Engineers moved more than 10 million cubic yards of earth during the campaign. They built airfields capable of hosting hundreds of aircraft within weeks. They repaired harbors while shells still fell. It was labor on a scale unseen in history. Japanese diaries expressed despair. "They move earth faster than we can kill men." U.S. National Archives, 1945. The recognition was grim. Sacrifice could not compete with steel. The ethical capsule pressed again. Was it humane to win by machines that never tired? Geneva Conventions covered combatants and civilians, not earth movers that multiplied destruction. Some historians argue this shift revealed modern war's true nature. Battles fought not just with weapons, but with factories and machines that erased geography. Was that progress, or was it dehumanization of war? The question lingers still. Back home, propaganda celebrated engineers. Newsreels showed bulldozers toppling trees, cutting mountains, carving roads. Narrators called them weapons of progress. The American public embraced the image. War as construction, not only destruction. Children played with toy bulldozers inspired by films of engineers in jungles and deserts. Industry fed myth, and myth fed morale. The paradox never disappeared. Bulldozers saved lives by enabling rapid advances, reducing time under fire. But they also extended destruction by making offensives inevitable. To defenders, the machines were terror made of steel. To attackers, they were salvation. To historians, they remain symbols of an age when production equaled power. In the closing months, bulldozers became tools of transition. As Germany collapsed, engineers cleared rubble for refugee camps, leveled ground for field hospitals, and rebuilt railways to carry displaced people. In Japan, after surrender, bulldozers removed ruins and rebuilt cities. Civilians saw them as engines of hope. The same blades that cleared battlefields now carved peace. The sensory legacy lingered. Veterans recalled the constant thrum of engines in dreams, the metallic taste of dust, the smell of oil soaked into skin. Many said silence felt strange after the war, as if something essential had vanished. One engineer told interviewers, "We knew war was over, not when guns fell silent, but when the bulldozers stopped." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The escalation had reached its peak. Machines had become more than tools. They were the industrial heartbeat of victory. By 1945, the world had seen a new kind of weapon, not one that destroyed, but one that created at such speed that destruction itself became irrelevant. That was the ultimate shock. The war ended, but the bulldozers did not fall silent. Their engines still roared in ruined cities and shattered landscapes. Berlin, Cologne, Hamburg, Warsaw. Bulldozers pushed aside debris, leveled ground for refugee camps, and reopened lifelines of transport. In France, civilians saw machines scraping rubble away, preparing ground for markets and schools. One survivor remembered, "We woke not to artillery, but to diesel. That was when we knew the war had truly ended." Red Cross Report, 1946. The scale of rebuilding was immense. In Germany alone, Allied engineers cleared more than 75 million cubic meters of rubble in the first 3 years. Bulldozers became the front line of peace. In Poland, they reopened railways. In Italy, they leveled grounds for new hospitals. In the Low Countries, they rebuilt dikes shattered by retreating German forces. Numbers told the story. The same machines that had carved roads for armies now carved survival for millions. The sensory echoes shifted. Instead of cordite, the air filled with the smell of oil and fresh-turned earth. Instead of thunder of guns, it was the roar of engines. Children climbed onto idling machines laughing, their hands blackened with grease. The taste of dust lingered, but this dust meant rebirth, not destruction. Civilians associated bulldozers with hope, not fear. In Japan, the transition was just as profound. Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya lay in ashes from firebombing. Bulldozers cleared wreckage, prepared land for housing, and reopened docks. By 1946, nearly half of Tokyo's destroyed districts had been bulldozed flat to allow rebuilding. The symbolism was sharp. The same engines that had enabled bombers to burn cities now enabled civilians to rebuild them. Japanese witnesses recalled, "We feared them in war, but in peace, they became the sound of our new beginning." U.S. National Archives, 1946. The ethical capsule pressed into post-war years. Were bulldozers weapons or saviors? During the war, they multiplied destruction by making offensives unstoppable. After the war, they multiplied recovery by making ruins livable. Geneva had never addressed such machines. Historians still argue, did bulldozers prove industrial war's cruelty or humanity's resilience? The ambiguity lingers. The statistics of recovery were staggering. Between 1945 and 1950, bulldozers leveled ground for over 10,000 schools, refugee camps, and hospitals across Europe and Asia. They rebuilt more than 200,000 miles of roads. In some places, more earth was moved in peace than during the conflict. Survivors remembered the rhythm of engines as constant as church bells. Veterans carried the machine's legacy home. Men who drove bulldozers in France and the Pacific became operators in peacetime America. They built highways, suburbs, airports. A veteran who carved runways on Saipan later cut runways in Chicago. Another, who leveled rubble in Aachen, later leveled ground for schools in Kansas. Their war never left them. It transformed into infrastructure. Culturally, the bulldozer entered myth. Newsreels showed them as heroes. Toy companies sold miniature dozers to children, who played out battles of creation. Films portrayed them as weapons of progress. For a generation, victory was symbolized not only by tanks and planes, but by the steady blade of a bulldozer. Historians now list bulldozers among decisive weapons of World War II. Eisenhower named them in his famous quartet: the Jeep, the Dakota, the landing craft, and the bulldozer. General Bradley echoed the sentiment. Our engineers, with bulldozers, may have been more vital than divisions of infantry. U.S. National Archives, 1946. Such recognition crystallized their place in history. The sensory memory endured longest. Veterans described dreaming of engines, feeling vibrations in bones, recalling the acrid sting of oil. Civilians remembered dust clouds rising as rubble cleared, the sudden clarity of open streets where ruins had stood. For both, bulldozers symbolized the hinge between destruction and survival. The paradox remains unresolved. Bulldozers built victory, but also extended destruction by making advance inevitable. They were tools of humanity and tools of total war. The same blade cleared jungles for tanks and cleared ruins for families. The same engine powered conquest and recovery. Their duality defines them. By the late 1940s, their influence spread worldwide. Nations purchased thousands for reconstruction. Former battlefields became highways. Jungle trails became plantations. War machines became engines of prosperity, yet their shadow remained. Every road reminded Europeans of convoys of tanks. Every runway in Asia echoed bombers that once rose from bulldozed coral. The final legacy is industrial truth. World War II proved that victory was not won only by destruction, but by the power to create faster than enemies could destroy. Tanks and planes mattered, but bulldozers kept them moving, kept supplies flowing, kept advance inevitable. The industrial heartbeat of victory was not always measured in shells fired, but in earth moved. The sensory legacy echoes in museums today. Rusted bulldozers stand alongside tanks and planes. Children climb them, unaware they once carved battlefields. Veterans watch with quiet pride. History books mention them as weapons of construction. They remain quiet giants of the 20th century. So what was the final lesson? That wars are decided not only by courage or cunning, but by the capacity to move mountains. America bulldozed obstacles until resistance collapsed. Destruction ceased to matter when rubble became new roads. Geography ceased to matter when valleys filled and hills flattened. Resistance ceased to matter when advance never stopped. One engineer's words capture it all. Our tanks could be stopped. Our planes could fall. But our bulldozers never quit. And when they moved, so did victory. U.S. National Archives, 1945. His phrase endures as epitaph for an unglamorous but decisive machine. The war is long past, but its echoes remain. Every modern army builds as much as it fights. Every modern conflict depends on logistics as much as firepower. That doctrine was born in the rumble of bulldozers between 1941 and 1945. Their legacy is not only in roads and runways, but in the recognition that creation can be as decisive as destruction. Thus, the blade of the bulldozer stands among history's most powerful weapons, not by killing, but by building so relentlessly that killing alone could never stop it. They remind us that victory often belongs not to those who destroy, but to those who create faster than anything can be destroyed.